Good evening. My name is Simon Trewin. I'm a literary agent and I've worked in publishing for about 30 years. But I'm not here wearing my literary agent hat tonight. I'm here to introduce you to two rather extraordinary women, and I think we're going to have a really interesting conversation about storytelling and, whoops, that's a nice sound, isn't it? Creativity and how everything overlaps. But I just wanted to start by saying I've just come this morning from Frankfurt Book Fair. And clearly there's a lot going on in the world at the moment that isn't directly to do with books. And it's impossible to turn the television on without seeing the news that takes our minds. We travel in all sorts of directions. But I've had lots of conversations in the last few days with agents I work with from all over the world. And I think there is a lot of hope out there in small ways. I was talking to the Ukrainian agent yesterday who said that more bookshops had opened in Ukraine in the last year than in the last 5 years before that. And it just made me think that even in the Middle East at the moment, that stories are what drive us all forward, and stories are being told about things as they unfold at the moment. But ultimately, stories are going to survive a lot longer than we do. And I think there are only 7 plots. There's a famous book called The 7 Plots. And I think what everybody does, they're all variations on themes. What makes the difference, and it's why it's exciting to have two, on one level, very different writers together on the stage. It's the voice that matters. It's not necessarily what you're telling us, it's how you're telling us that story, and what we're left with is that sense of texture. So on my left is Leanne Ellul, and I know a lot about you. I know you were born on Friday the 13th. I know that you prefer pizza to salad. You like coffee more than you like water, and your favorite day of the week is a Friday. I'm going to be asking you all the same questions. I'm just going to tell you that as well. But one of the things that struck me is, like Sam Blake, you also love incubating young talent, and you lecture in creative writing. But you write poetry, you write prose, you write for the theatre, you translate into Maltese. I don't know why I'm telling you this. You know what I'm telling you.
Yeah. I'm getting to know myself better, you know.
You've written for TV and also for theatre, and you have an award-winning and record-breaking novel called Grammar. So, and I'm not sure what you're reading from today, but I know your first collection, The Inventory of the Blue Room, I think we have copies here later on. So there's a lot going on there that we want to come back to. And on my right, Sam Blake, you're one of the busiest creative people on another extraordinary island. You're the founder of writing.ie, which is the biggest hub for writing in Europe, for encouraging talent. You also run a crime festival, and you're a huge supporter of emerging talent. So your debut novel was a crime novel, Little Bones, and that set the bar quite high by debuting at #1. And I think I worked out, you've almost spent a year in the top 10 with your various books. 7 books?
Yeah, it'll be 10 actually in January when the next one comes out.
And you've written series novels which have their own particular set of challenges, but you've also written standalones. And you've been shortlisted for the Irish Book of the Year in crime novel category. But you've also recently started writing as a young adult writer with Something Terrible Happened Last Night, good title. You're going to be reading from one of your standalones.
Yeah.
Anyway, a very, very brief introduction, but I feel pretty humbled. There's a lot to talk about. Please welcome these two extraordinary women. So there seems to be a huge amount of overlap, and I thought, for those people in the room who don't know both of your voices, why don't we start with a reading? In your case, you're going to read in 2 languages. Thank you. You know this, don't you? I'm not sort of...
I was going to read just the part in Maltese. Should I do that? Or, yeah?
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, okay.
So why don't you start?
So I'll be reading from Grammar, which is 9 years old now. And yeah, every time I read from the book, I feel it's always a different experience for me as well. And well, let's see how it goes. So this chapter is entitled Kollox itjeb mit-tarja u l-qarabali mimli li tkewwes in-nanna. Mit-tiġiġ u t-saltet Malti Tom Markita mill-pizza tal-friża u t-saltet u l-baked beans tal-ma u anke mit-toast tal-pa kollox. L-arja l-iktar għandha toma tajba ħafna. Min kollox qed jippruvaw idewquni u qed ikolli niekol xi ħaġa x'daqskemm ma niflaħx niekol ma niflaħx għall-ajjat trid naqqas. Ħaduni għand it-tabib u għamilli koċ mistoqsijiet li kollha spiċċaw b'Sinjorina. X'jismek Sinjorina? Kemm għandek żmien Sinjorina? Xi tħobb sabiħ Sinjorina? X'antipatija. U issa qaluli li se joħduni għand tabib ieħor speċjalizzat, Dr. Fern, il-psikjatra. L-ikbar marki mhux qed inġibhom mill-iskola ma meta ma nikolx 5 cherry tomatoes biss, 10 lewżiet biss, 30 gramma tuffieħa biss. Meta jġeluni nikol ħafna bil-fors, naqla ġovażetti żgħar tal-ħġieġ u naħbihom taħt il-ħwejjeġ ma jiġunix fil-gwardarobba. Ftit fit-tojlet u ftit fil-vażett biex niftakar kemm irrid imbagħti meta nikol. Imbagħad nitkebbeb fix-xalla il-blu fuq is-sit tat-tojlet u nibki u nisma'. You see the struggle, flood the skin, nara. From promises to paper tin, narani. She turns a blind eye, will of stone, from stunning smile to flesh and bone, fejnu l-Adam. L-ilma tat-toilet qisu xaħam, iqattar xaħam għandek iva. Adam imkien frasi forsi għax dik jibsa. Imqariddu u sabiħa ejja jisa u drabi oħra ejja duqu. Imbagħad hemm drabi meta l-pa jirrabja ħafna. Jien kont nara ħelu wisq lil-pa u l-bieraħ pereżempju iktar rajtu ħelu. Il-ħelu li ħaxxen, insejt. Tela lija fil-kamra u refani minn fuq is-sodda biex ninżel għall-ikel. Kif jerfani, qisni mjinnerfa xejn jgħid, jiġri bija sal-kċina jpoġġini bil-qeda u biex jurini li kien jaf x'għamilt bit-tejb xhur qabel jgħid li qed taraħ dan, taf x'inhu dan u żgur li taf x'inhu dan. Nitmaħħulek jekk tgħidli li ma tafx, forsi mqarti jkoll dan ma fihx kaloriji tal-anqas waħda qara ħa. U joħroġ il-miżien mill-banku jibda jqatta biċċiet tat-tejb ġo riċipjent tal-miżun jgħid li ħa, qed tara lanqas jiżen xejn, naħseb wara kemm għandu kaloriji. U l-ma fil-ġemp tiċċassa nħossa trid ittieħ raġun, ma trid waqfu wkoll għax il-punt tiegħu għamlu, forsi għamlu żejjed ukoll u issa jnejha il-ma jidhru li lanqas jifilħu jibku iktar. Qatt ma rajtu hekk il-pa. Ma nafx jekk hux għax iħossa lija jew għalih innifsu qed ikollu joqgħod iktar id-dar mill-gażin. I'll wrap it up here.
Thank you very much. And Sam, what are you going to give us?
I was going to read you the prologue from The Mystery of Four, which is the thriller that's currently out at the moment, and it's set in the Wicklow Mountains in a house called Kilfranora House. And so this is a bit just at the start of the book. Almost midnight. The garden is ink black, as though it's been washed with a brush. Details of marble statues and sweeping steps picked out by the weak moonlight. Below, a bronze fountain cast in the likeness of Apollo splashes water into the lake, disturbing the stillness of the hour. Accompanied by the distant scream of a fox, the hoot of an owl, the night sounds meld into a backdrop for what is to come. The stars move still, time runs, the clock will strike. Skirting the high granite wall, careful footsteps crunch on the gravel to the end of the path, where towering gates stand open, wrought iron flourishes picked out with golden ivy leaves, visible even in the darkness. Now, cutting across the neatly mown grass in the front of the glass houses, and through another set of matching gates. Beyond, a series of round rose beds and square ponds are linked like gems in a necklace along the formal rose walk, leading to the wishing well and the yew maze. On either side, crowded flower beds wait for the morning sunshine, their scent heavy, trapped between high walls covered in more roses, their stems entwined, thick with thorns. A black shape slips into the foliage unseen, green eyes watching. Almost there. This will be the last trip. It's been a long journey, the planning detailed, but there's been a lot of time for that. Now, the last act will be easy. The water in the ponds is deathly still, the fragrance of roses and buddleia heavy in the night air. Just beyond the last set of gates, tucked into the corner, is the poison garden. Fenced in to keep the unsuspecting public safe, the brass sign is dull without the sun to light it. Stepping onto the bone-dry earth, trowel ready, the tall purple-flowered stems are hard to see, buried deep in the shrubbery. But it is the roots that are the most potent, dried and ground to a lethal powder. Watching her suffering as she slowly succumbs will be poetry indeed. Glancing up, windows mirror-like in the darkness, the house is quiet now, as if it's waiting to see what happens, because it's all about to happen. The time is come.
Thank you both very much. I'm really interested in process, because everybody has different process, and writing is something that it's done in private. It's done behind closed doors. It's just really interesting hearing you both read, because I don't understand what you're reading, but I can get a sense of what's going on there from the way you read it. And I just wondered, starting with you, Leanne, do you read your work out loud during the creation process?
I forgot I have a mic. I was going to ask you for the mic. Yes, of course. And that is the point where I start to spot my own mistakes. I really sort of keep an eye on my rhythm, and I'm really keen to have a rhythm that flows. So when I'm reading out loud, obviously, that really comes through, if even if it's there and if it's not. I write very differently when it comes to poetry and prose, for instance. But I think much of what I write, well, my mentor Claire says that is veered towards poetry at the end of the day. And I think that can be a beautiful thing, but I write very differently, as in with prose it takes much more time. You have to stay with your characters, and doing a million things doesn't really help sometimes. So yeah, but at the end, Sam, you mentioned this, when you have a first draft, at least you have that, and then you can work with that. And that is when I read the work out loud, and then I give it to an editor and my friends to read it, and then maybe that is when the real work starts. Not that the work before that is not the real work, but then you have something to work on or work with, and yeah.
I mean, that's really interesting about the poetry and prose, because I was going to ask you that later on. Do you feel you're almost using a different part of your brain for poetry or prose, or are they in the same river, as it were?
No, I feel that they are two different processes. And sometimes I question myself if I'm ever writing prose, at the end of the day. But yeah, I mean, I find poetry or poetical work in much of what I do. And nowadays I'm starting sort of to capitalize on that. And although when I'm writing a novel, I know I'm in the mindset of writing a novel, I'm capitalizing on poetry rather than trying to shy away from it, or I'm trying to bring that in and work with that, whilst obviously trying to work on the characters, plot, and all the other things.
Brilliant. Okay, I think I'm going to come back to that whole creativity, because it clearly comes out in many different ways. So, I mean, a couple of things about that. It's the prologue to the book. Does that necessarily mean it was written first? And also, do you read the novel out to your cat or to your family, or what? How does it work?
Yeah, I definitely read out, certainly dialogue I would read, and as I'm writing it quite often, because I think you need to, it's sort of that acting process, you need to be living the moment with the characters, making faces at the computer if people are cross or whatever it is. So yeah, no, I would read definitely the dialogue out. Yeah, that bit was written first, and I really wanted to call this book The Time Has Come, which is that last line of the prologue. That's a quote from Dr. Faustus, because the play Dr. Faustus features very heavily in this, and the line about the time moving forwards is from Dr. Faustus too. But when I actually sent it in to my editor the first time round, I didn't include the prologue, because I don't know why, I didn't think it quite fitted with the book. And but I had this great idea for this title, The Time Has Come, but everybody hated The Time Has Come, everybody. So, and then I realised that it was mainly because I didn't understand why it was in there, and then I went back and added the prologue, and it actually made much more sense. So yeah, so it was the very first thing that was written, but then I took it out. I think when you are writing, it's a bit like you're moving. It's like moving puzzle pieces around. Certainly with this book, I didn't plot it out in detail, and so there was moving of things, different chapters around the place to try and make sure that the pace was right as you're going through the story. So it was a slightly different experience to some of the other ones I've written.
I mean, I'm going to come back. I'm going to ask Leanne about plotting as well, but it seems to me that a prologue, it has a really important role to play in something, because your novel is very much rooted in a place, isn't it? So you've got to evoke that, I guess.
Yeah, the gardens. Yeah, I don't know why I took it out. I wrote it and I loved it, and it's very significant because it's about the one of the themes of the book is, well, there's a poison that's used through, and obviously the person's going to gather the poison, so it's important for the story. But I don't know why. Yeah, I think even at this stage of really writing loads of books, there are moments when you're just not sure whether something works or not. And I really love it. And when I read it there, I'm thinking, actually, it's not too bad. It does work at the start of the book. But it's for some reason, I thought I'd take it out initially.
I mean, I've got a background in theatre, and you've written for theatre, and I think sometimes I think the value of a prologue, it kind of tells people that they're going to sit down and read a book.
Yeah.
And it says they're leaving the world aside, and they're now entering into a world that you're creating. And I wondered it's a lot harder to do that with poetry, I guess, because you're writing, it's a much more economic form, isn't it?
Of course, but to a certain extent, if you're performing poetry, you can sort of engage the people more, so to say. And I mean, I do this, like I said, even when I'm reading a novel aloud, it feels different almost every time. But I think poetry gives you more time and space sort of to play with the performance, to feel the audience, and to tap on that and work with it. Obviously, I think poetry is not for everyone, or at least particular kinds of poetry are not for everyone. And people might be sort of enticed more by a novel or something longer. But obviously, that's the magic of poetry, that in that one single moment or with one single word, you are telling multiple stories then. And for me, like you were saying at the beginning, it's all about stories, be it if they're told through a metaphor or through a lengthy book or through, I don't know, a haiku. But at the end of the day, we are capturing that moment and gifting it. Maybe that is a word I can use, like gifting it to the audience at the end of the day.
I love that. I mean, it's interesting. I think you said earlier on that you found writing poetry easier than writing prose.
Yes.
Because I used to represent a short story writer who said, at one point I said, are you going to write a new short story collection? And she said, I could write you a novel, but if you want me to write a short story collection, that's going to take a lot longer. Yeah. And I just wondered, did the right words just come to you faster for poetry?
One quick comment about the short story. I think, at least for myself, the short story is the hardest. Because you still have a plot, you still have characters, but you cannot go all over the place. Yeah. You really have to stick with it and have something contained within there. Your question was, again...
I was just asking, do you find that the words come faster and easier when you're writing poetry?
It's not faster and easier, but Sam was speaking about, even to our students yesterday, about the light bulb moment. I mean, there are moments, you know, it's not inspiration or something like that, but there's a moment when you see something, when you hear something that you know is, I don't know, special, or something comes back to you. And somehow, I think I don't want to romanticize the moment, but I sort of let poetry flow.
Yeah.
And sometimes I do not know how not to do it in poetry. So sometimes poetry dictates sort of what I write. With prose, I feel you have to be more strict, you have to be more disciplined sometimes, and that takes a lot of skill. I'm not saying that poetry doesn't, but somehow poetry, I don't know, comes more natural to me.
And I'm going to ask you the same question, but so you have an idea first, and then is the form dictated by the idea?
That's an interesting question. In my case, sort of the idea is always born with a form attached to it.
Wow.
So I've written about anorexia in a novel, but I haven't written any poetry really about anorexia. My poetry is mostly about the sea, relationships, memories as well. The works I've written for theatre, much of them are related to psychological aspects as well.
Okay.
And then I write funny stories for kids. I cannot see myself, not I cannot see myself, I wish that someday I will do that, to write funny stories for adults. But I haven't done that. So yeah, in my case, they're sort of born together.
Wonderful. What about you? Because you've started now writing for young adults, which is a kind of designated category, isn't it?
Yeah, very much so. I love the idea when you talk about gifting the moment,
Yeah. It's
and that really, you get that light bulb moment, and the words come, the story comes with it. Somehow it all starts to join together suddenly. And I'm wondering if it's because you speak a couple of different languages that poetry is nearly like a language, and when the light bulb comes on and the words, the story's there, and it's that moment, and it just flows. That's when I was talking yesterday about being in the zone, when you start writing, and I remember I was talking about looking at the clock and it being 12 o'clock, and then literally writing and looking up again, and suddenly it's 4 o'clock and you don't know where that time's gone. You're in that zone, that's when the magic's happening, and that's exactly what that sounds like. It's amazing. And I think it's similar for me, that you get an idea, or a partial idea, and you get I was talking about the connection of two interrelated ideas, and sometimes it's three, and sometimes you get bits of ideas, but you know you haven't got the whole idea, and you have to wait for the rest of it to arrive before the story fully forms. And it's like you're sort of building something in your head. And I've forgotten what the question is now as well.
Whether, you have an idea and you think this is going to be an adult novel, or
a
it's
children's
gonna
novel.
be
Yes, yes. So I suppose you do. Do you? Yes, that's a good question. So when I was tasked, I was asked by a publisher to write the children's book, and I came up with an idea for the children's book. Is about a 17th birthday party that goes horribly wrong, and Katie invites a whole load of schools together. There's a big fight, and when they clear the room, they realise that there's a body behind the living room sofa. And I originally came up with the idea of trying to write it for younger kids, and I just couldn't do it. I couldn't get the voice right, and it just didn't work. I couldn't remember. I was supposed to be she wanted it for middle grade, and so I was trying to be 12, and I couldn't really remember being 12, and the whole idea of a party and the party going didn't really work with 12-year-olds. But I really loved that idea, and I went away and said, look, I can't do this. It's not going to work. But the idea was still burning inside. And she said, well, look, I said, I could probably do it. I think I can do it for 16, 17-year-olds. And it fitted. And she said, yeah, okay, off you go and do that. And so I did, and it worked. And it really flowed then. And I think, when you find the form, sometimes you come up with an idea, and there's not enough of an idea for it to be a novel. So I remember writing a short story. Somebody had found 2 blackbirds dead on their drive. Everything in my life's a bit gloomy, isn't it? A bit grim. But anyway, at these 2 blackbirds, and it was a male and a female blackbird, and I don't think they realised they were a male and a female blackbird, but they were telling me about it, and I just thought that was really interesting, and had a little light bulb moment about that, and started thinking about it, but there wasn't enough story for a novel, and so that's something that I then brought to a short story, and was able to write in that form, because I think, some ideas do dictate. They find their own form, don't they? It's something to do with the magic and the subconscious mind.
Yeah. I suppose you're writing in genres that by definition, have rules, don't
Absolutely, yeah. So it's not so free-flowing, so I need something to happen.
You need a body.
I need a body, usually, yes, yeah, of some sort. Yeah, which was a bit weird when I was writing for young adults, because I wasn't really very keen about killing off.
Well,
I have an 18-year-old at home, so killing off a 17-year-old was a bit... But, yeah.
And then when you're writing poetry, do you impose rules on that? Because it's quite a free form, isn't it?
Yeah, but sometimes I do. I mean, I try to write poetry with discipline as well. As much as I know how much discipline goes into writing a novel, I try to apply that to poetry. Obviously, sometimes you can't push it too much. But I hate the word teach poetry. I don't teach poetry writing. I mean, I exchange ideas about poetry writing. And sometimes I try to apply that to what I do. So if I'm stuck and maybe want to explore an idea, sometimes it starts off by reading another poem by someone else. It's just that, you know. But sometimes I do these exercises if I'm totally stuck and I feel I want to get out an idea or something like that. Obviously, the first draft would be rubbish, but at least, you know, you've written something.
Yeah.
I don't like to push it too much in the sense that I don't want to force it. I don't want to lose the... Joy is in the word. I don't feel joy when I'm writing poetry. It is what it is. But I don't want to lose the moment. I don't want to hate poetry for having to write it, sort of. But yeah, sometimes I have to push myself. I mean, if I write only when I feel like it, you know, then I might not write at all.
I mean, something you said then I love is that notion that it's something you have to do, because we've talked to many writers over the years, and I think the writers who ultimately have a long period of a long career are people who just can't think of not doing it.
Yeah, just have to write. I think that's the thing. It's just that you get the idea. I love that idea of the fact that you're feeding the creative machine. Like when you get stuck, you're going to read other people's, and I do that too. So if I've got the start of idea, or I need to sit down and write something, and I'm dry, effectively, I'll go out and read around an area, or I might find an article, or if it's a historical piece, read a book that's set in that period, or whatever it is, to try and feed the machine, because you can't create unless you've got that stuff in your head, I suppose, floating around.
So what does a good day at the creative office look like for you? I mean, is it the number of words, or is it solving how do I get this character from this room to that room?
Yeah, for me, I think it's writing a chapter. So if I can get a chapter, the bones of a chapter written, this is when I'm writing a first draft.
That's a huge thing to try and do.
Yeah, but but my chapters are very short. So I only write 1,000-word chapters. So I know I'm aiming to get to around 1,000 words, and quite often that the bones of a chapter might be 800 words.
Okay.
And I'd be quite pleased because I've moved the story forwards, and I know I've got the structure right and things are in the right place, and I'll go back the next day and rewrite that. But I have discovered very recently that actually what I really love doing is rewriting that first. So once you've got the bones done, it's the next day. That's when I start to really enjoy it, when I really get into the story, and I'm thinking about where the light's coming from. Keep talking about that. And who's where, and adding the stage directions, and that's the bit I think it's polishing it, making it more beautiful, and that's the bit I think that it can be quite hard work going uphill when you're trying to lay down that first bit. But
so I think Ian Fleming famously would write 750 words a day, lock it in a drawer, and then at the end of the 4 weeks he then read the novel and started writing. But you keep going back, so you're kind of embellishing it before you're allowing yourself to move forward. Yeah,
it's like a layering process. So I would write the structure of the chapter, which is usually dialogue, and sort of what's happening. We'll get to the end, we'll know where we're going. The important thing that the reader has to know in that chapter has been conveyed. And then the next day I'll go back and I'll fill it out. So we're getting to our 1,000 words, and it's a bit better looking and better shaped, and then I move forward to the next bit, and that's effectively what I see as being a first draft. So by the time I get to the end of the first draft, it should hold together. It should be reasonably decent prose. Whether I then have to move chapters around and change things happening, or I've forgotten to, I've found a wonderful red herring that I thought was very exciting in this particular chapter and thrown it out there and then forgotten to go back to it. That has to be fixed then afterwards in the second draft.
As I was saying earlier, because you're writing, you are writing something that ultimately has to completely hold together because your readers will spot it otherwise.
Oh yes.
That you have to solve problems. If you go ahead at this angle rather than that, 5 chapters down the line, you're way off where you should be, aren't you?
Yeah, but in theory, because I plot, when I did plot, the plotting solves that problem because you've got a rough idea of where you're going.
Yeah.
It's just a framework, it's not a detailed plot, and sometimes you do go off at angles, but with the book that's coming out in January, which is about a facial reconstruction expert, I got to chapter 5 when I was writing that book, and I was about to kill somebody off, and I really liked her, and I didn't want to kill her off, and I thought the reader would really like her too, and so I thought, well, if I keep her, that's going to change the whole story. And it wasn't a book that was contracted, it was sort of an extra book, it was my lockdown book, and I thought, I'm just going to keep writing and see what happens. And it was the first time I really done that, and it worked. And it all came together in the end, and it was great. And so when I wrote this one, I did a lot less plotting. It's like you with the free flow to try and get the creativity flowing more. We were just chatting outside, and you'll quite like this actually, because we're talking about time.
I'll be the judge of that,
but we were talking about time. You're always telling me I need to give more time to the writing, and exactly what Leanne was saying. We were talking about the state of mind you're in when you're very, very busy, and how you access that creativity and the time. And when you plot, because you're doing a lot of the work beforehand before you even start writing, then you can just sit down and you can write. And so I can write anywhere. I can write on planes, I can write in cafes, wherever. But when you're not plotting and you're waiting for the magic to happen, you need a lot more headspace, which is what you were saying. Yeah. So we've worked that out outside. You'll be pleased to hear.
But I remember reading an interview with the director Alfred Hitchcock, who said he used to storyboard all of his films, and he said the most boring part of the process was making the film.
Yeah, afterwards.
What he loved was the plotting and the angles and this. So clearly, you're not writing in a way that has the same restrictions that the genre does, that Sam Blake is. But are you a plotter, or are you a let's see where they take me?
No. When it comes to a novel, I have to plot. And obviously I do it. I try to engage with the characters and live with the characters, and sometimes they become very real, and they start speaking to you rather than you speaking to them.
Yeah.
No, but I cannot do it any other way. Usually, at least with this novel, it was a bit open-ended. People, sort of, the audience could decide on an ending, but there wasn't a fixed, neatly done ending. So at sort of the last chapters, I leave it a bit freer, but for the most part of the novel, it has to be plotted out with titles for each chapters, because I really love titles. And I have to have the title before I start writing.
So that was called grammar before you started?
Yes, in this case we kept the title.
You hinted at something there about the characters coming alive and talking to
Yeah.
you. So clearly what you're writing dictates the kind of mood you're in, does it? I mean, are you a nice person to be around when you're writing dark poetry? Or does it really affect your mood, or do you take a bad mood and let it go through the writing?
That's an interesting question. I don't know. I'm not sure about the direction, but what I know is that when I'm in a state of mind of writing, sort of, it's not easy to take me away from there. And that's when I sort of keep on writing. And I will tie this into what you were saying and what you were saying before. I think the secret is to keep at it. But for me to keep at it doesn't necessarily mean to write all the time. For me, reading is writing as well. For me, thinking about it is writing as well. So in my head, I'm always writing, even if I'm not jotting it down, you know? And I think that sort of is what fuels me. But yeah, it does dictate my mood a bit. Yeah, but sometimes I think it works the other way around. I don't think there's a recipe for that, but it's a good question. I'll have to think more about that.
I mean, you know, it's interesting you talk about how even when you're not writing, you're being creative, because I think a lot of writers, you know, they might write for 2 or 3 hours a day. And, you know, you mention that to a non-writing person and they say, well, that sounds like a pretty easy job. You just work for 2 or 3 hours a day. But it's that walking around time, isn't it, where your mind is kind of filing things away and you're finding ways of doing it. But I mean, I think being forcibly kept away from a laptop or something when you're trying to write a novel is quite an interesting process, because I know some people just get back to it. I mean, you're quite overcommitted sometimes when you're doing other things. And I don't imagine you just switch the tap off when you're running a festival. But when you get back to it, does it kind of flow out because it's been held back by?
Yeah, it can do, actually.
life?
It can, and I love that. I love that feeling of needing to write.
Yeah.
You know, when the story's building, and this is what, you know, because you write, you carry it around with you the whole time. And if you haven't been able to write because you've been prevented by whatever it is you're doing, that the story's building and you know you need to say this thing and you need to get to the laptop to do that. And that's always a great time and a great place to write. Yeah, I really like that when that happens.
It seems to me like you setting yourself a target of a whole chapter, that's massive, because I know some writers I've spoken to, 300 words is what they set themselves as a target, and they kind of know they're going to get above it, so every day is a good day.
Yeah,
but if they have a bad day, they've still achieved something. But 1,000 it's a big...
Yeah, well, I think that's what I aim for. That's when I've got a clear writing time. I would aim to sit down and say, right, we're going to get to the end of this chapter. I was writing earlier today, and I did manage 300 words, so I'm feeling quite happy with myself, because I haven't been able to write for a bit because I've been busy. So... and I think, that it's incremental. So whatever way you're moving forward is the key, really, isn't it? That you've got to get to the end. I suppose I have to find 100,000 words from somewhere, and I'm at 33,500, I think, with this new book that I'm writing. And I keep thinking to myself, that's a third done. That's great. Yeah. So I just have to find out what happens with the rest of it now. But it's, you just have to keep moving forwards, basically. Yeah.
You both mentioned, and I find this as an agent, and I read lots of books, that I know I'm excited about something when I forget I'm reading a book. When I go there and I look up, and as you say, it was 12 o'clock, it's 4 o'clock, and the cat's hungry, the lights have gone off, and I'm in this world. And that is the power of what you both do, isn't it? You're creating a world, might be very like the world we're in, or very different, but off we go. And do you, when you're starting that process, do you think about other writers, or are you just selfish and focusing? I mean, do you worry that you're doing something that's a bit like somebody else, or are you just...
Oh yes, I do. I mean, I think it's not easy to find one's own voice and style. This is a subject that is very dear to me, and it's not easy to find a balance. Once I had a student, she told me, but if I read a book, I'm afraid that then I will copy it. And I told her that's why I have to read loads of books, so you don't know where you're stealing from, sort of. No, but joking apart, I mean, that is when you take sort of precious moments from different books and whatever, it can be films or music, and sort of you make them your own. But sometimes at the back of my head, I have this thing, you know. Sometimes I feel that as writers, we're a bit pretentious as well, in the sense that if I'm writing a book, a story, and then publishing it as a book, I feel that I use the word gifting. It is a bit like gifting, you know, like giving a gift to someone, and you wouldn't know if that person likes that gift or not.
Right.
So sometimes I feel that if I'm writing something, I'm sort of imposing something on my readers. Obviously, they can put it aside and not read it at all. But there's this tension, you know, is what I'm writing valid? Do I have something to say?
Yeah.
And I hope that when I don't have anything else to say, I will stop writing maybe, because that's the time to stop, you know? I mean, if you don't have, not necessarily anything new, but in a new-ish way, at least.
I mean, having spent 30 years working with writers and helping them in various ways, I think most people worry too much about creating a voice, because I think, not just the two of you, but I think most people who are serious about their craft, there is a voice, and I think a lot of people overthink it. And I know exactly what you're saying, and I often think about the songwriting world, and I think, well, I know I could write a bad novel, but I couldn't write a song at all, because it would be the Beatles, you know, because it would whatever's going around in my head. Yeah. But you know, I mean, even not understanding what you were saying, you quite clearly have a voice. You know, there is a style and a rhythm which is unique to you. It's your creative DNA. So I don't know. I think sometimes in genre fiction there is a danger that people write. I mean, it's still got a voice, but it's very similar to other people's version of a body in the library, or whatever it might be. And I don't know. Do you worry about the genre?
Do I worry
because
about
it's
the
a
genre?
Crowded old genre, isn't it?
It's very crowded, yes. I think at this stage I have found the way that I tell stories, and it's quite distinct to me.
Yep.
And so when I'm drawing together a story, I'm focusing on the story. And even though I try and do things differently in each book, and I'm trying to grow with each book, I think there's still themes and similarities between each one that are, so that if somebody likes Sam Blake, they know what they're getting with a Sam Blake book. They sort of know what they're getting, but they know that it's something different. It's going to be something different each time, because each book is obviously.
But you've got to make it interesting for you.
But I have to make it interesting for me, absolutely, and move the story forwards. And keep on moving. Do you? Yeah, I think you do. You think about. I think when it's published, you probably think more about what other people are doing and how it's going to fit in the market and stuff. But when you're actually writing it, it's all new, and you're finding the words your way through, and there's something exciting about that. And for me, it's always something new, and I don't know what's going to happen with the story, or where it's going to go, or how it's going to land, or if anybody's even going to like it, until I've sort of got to the end and it's really, really super polished. So, and I love that sort of exploration, that not quite knowing how things are going to come together is part of the mystery of it, and it's part of the creativity, and it's part of you finding your way. And I really enjoy that part. Sometimes it's like wading through treacle, and it's actually really rotten, but basically in principle, I enjoy that bit.
So, I mean, I remember I read the last Agatha Christie novel for some reason, and I realised that she was basically plagiarising herself, and that a lot of the tropes and plots and scenes and devices she'd done far better, 25 years earlier on. And the last book, clearly, people were terrified to edit her because she was Agatha Christie. It's a bit like the Harry Potter books get longer and longer.
Yeah.
But I wondered, do you ever plagiarise yourself unwittingly? Do you ever kind of think, oh, I've already had that thought and I've already said it?
What I did in my last novel, for instance, was to steal a verse from Grandma and put it in there as an Easter egg or something like. But not necessarily plagiarize myself. Obviously, what I'm really worried about, speaking about worries again, is that maybe I keep on returning to the same topics and not writing them differently,
Right.
So that's something that I'm a bit afraid of,
I think a bit of fear is a good thing in creativity.
Yeah, it makes you want to work more and discover more. And, well, for me, it's all about experimentation. And I think part of why I've tested sort of different genres is just because of the fact that I see it as an experimentation, process. And along the way, I'm lucky to have been published and to have been edited, because I think that's crucial. To have a very good editor to tell you when you're plagiarizing stuff. I think in the process you learn to adapt to others and maybe to listen more.
Yeah.
So for me, writing is a process ultimately that makes me grow or want to grow more in working with others. In the beginning, you mentioned about writing alone.
Yeah.
And obviously, I do write a lot on my own, but I do write with others as well. Mainly Claire again. And again, I think that has to do a lot with vulnerability.
Yeah.
With giving a space to someone, with giving space to someone, and with the fact that you're donating parts of yourself and letting others do something with that as well.
I mean, I think painting a picture is probably probably the purest creative form. There's no editing, I don't think, of art in that way.
I don't know how to draw.
But I mean, the rehearsal process, you go into it and you see actors bringing your characters to life.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Does that make you, did you do a lot of rewrites during rehearsal period when you wrote
Yeah, and there was this guy in this play that was held at the Manuel Theatre. I always write bad fathers, even in my novel. And there was this father who used to swear a lot and stuff. And the director went to this bar, and there was this guy who used to swear a lot, and he told him, okay, you can start. And he started recording him, and he swore much more than what I wrote. And that was done, well, beautifully maybe isn't the word. It was done nicely on stage. But obviously they weren't my exact words. But it worked, and it was what was needed for the play. So I try not to, impose a lot. If I'm giving you my play to do something with it, then I have faith in you that you'll do something out of it,
Well, that's interesting. It's a real move from that vulnerability. You're kind of allowing somebody else to layer their own creativity on top. You don't write, you haven't written a play, but I'm interested in that when you write, you do almost have a cast of characters in front of you. Sometimes you even get pictures and stick them up. So you have your own cast.
Yeah, it's very visual. I create storyboards for each book so that I've got the pictures of the people who are in the story. And I find that really helpful in locations as well, so I've got it fixed. And I think it's partly because I am quite busy and I'm doing other things, so that when I come back to the story, it's sitting there waiting for me. And I can see them really, really clearly. It also helps with the plotting a bit, so right at the very start, I'll find the pictures of all the various bits of people, and I know in the dark room there's a dog, so there was a picture of a dog, and the narrow boat that somebody lived on, and the hotel where everything happens. And I piece them all together, but I piece them together in terms of plot, so they'd be sort of related to each other, and the way the pictures touch off each other is sort of how I'm going to tell the story. So I do a bit of moving around at that stage too. As I'm moving forward. I think there's lots of different ways to create, aren't there? I love the idea of I think I find it quite mind-blowing when you're writing a play that the actors are you write the words and so much is happening, but then the actors, they bring in a completely extra dimension, and you can't predict what that's going to be, and it becomes something else on the screen. It's nearly like an audiobook. When you have an audiobook, you write the words, but then you hear it, and it's something different. It's a different form, and I think there's something creative and amazing about that whole process.
Well, I think what you described there is both stories, the world building has kind of come alive.
And it's not easy to let go, no?
Yeah, and
even to let go of a book.
Yeah.
So Simona has been signalling that we have 5 minutes left. I could keep talking to you two for hours because we've only scratched the surface, but would anybody else like to ask a question? No one ever likes to ask the first question. You would, thank you. I'll give up my microphone. Is there one coming round? There we go.
There we go.
Hi, my name is Ashley. I'm a spoken word artist and poet, and also a creative therapist. my question is based around creative therapy, and it seems with fiction, you're in a whole other world, obviously. It's not like non-fiction where you're writing, facts. How do you protect your space and your mental health through the process of writing fiction?
Well, brilliant question.
That's a good question. I don't know if I've ever thought about that.
Well, you should have done.
Yeah, no, I'm in my world when I'm in my world, and I'm the only person in there because it's in my head. So I feel very protected because it's my bubble, if you like. And so when I sit down to write, especially if nobody's seen it yet, I'm still finding a way with the characters and the different. So from that perspective, I don't know if that answers the question.
So would you say then that is your self-care as a creative?
Yeah, actually, yes, that's exactly right. So whenever I do anything, people say to me, well, what do you do as a hobby? And I write as a hobby. That's my thing. That's the thing I love to do more than anything else. So yeah, that is my self-care. That's my space where I can go off and do my own thing. Yeah, very good question.
You've had a chance to think
So you
about
asked
it.
that one.
I'm a bit of do what you love and let it kill you.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I'm protecting myself when I write about anorexia, self-harm, death, and anything in between. That's why earlier on I said I don't enjoy writing, as in I enjoy eating a pizza,
Yeah, having written.
taking out a dog, but writing sometimes sometimes it's painful, sometimes it's joyful as well. I mean, if I'm writing for kids, I'm laughing out loud at what I've written myself, But it is a very good question because writing, I think, brings you face to face with yourself, and there's no escape to that. Sometimes you have to face what you're writing, and you have to take responsibility of what you've written. So again, it has to do a lot with vulnerability, I think.
Thank you, Ashley. Brilliant question.
Very good question.
I think we've got room for one more. I think Simona's hogging the mic. No. Click the button, and it takes 3 seconds to come on, I think.
I'll shout.
Great. Well, fantastic question.
Yeah, I think it's the hardest when it comes to editing others' work, not to put in your own voice or to impose your own choices, especially in my case. I'm not an editor, but sometimes I happen to edit. I'm honored to edit my friends' work over here as well. So that's not easy, but from a lecturing viewpoint, sort of, I mean, I hate the idea of teaching. So for me, it's all about sharing. Even if we're discussing a poem, everybody has their own story, and they can read and interpret that poem through their experience, and they can find themselves in there through their experience. And obviously, I'm Leanne. So I cannot help not bringing a bit of myself in there as well. But I think that's when the sharing happens and the magic starts to form, you know. I don't know, at school we discuss a poem about the poet and her daughter, and most probably for the majority of my students, they don't have any daughters yet, but we've all gone through pain and taking care of something very dear, and we can capitalize on that. But I think I cannot help not bringing a bit of myself. Yeah.
Brilliant, thank you. Sam?
I think when I'm helping people, I do two things. I might be critiquing a piece of work, and usually it's about craft. So it's about trying to show the writer how they can show as opposed to tell, for instance, or how they can sharpen up their dialogue, or how we need to see a character before they start speaking. So we've got an idea about who it is. And so it's quite craft-based, so there's not much of me. I suppose it's just me, my experience, in terms of the fact that I know how to tell a story now, and I have my friends and colleagues all tell stories. And so over the years, we've learned our craft, and so I'm passing on that on a craft level. I also work with people sometimes plotting their books and helping them find the way to find the story. And I love doing that. And it's not about me, it's all about them, because they've always got the story in them. I think one of the things I've been talking about with the various things over the last few days is your subconscious mind, and how important your subconscious mind is, and learning to tune into it and understand what's happening in that mind, you know, in the back of your head. And so often when I'm working with somebody, what I'm trying to do is pull out the bits that are already there. And I can talk through a story with somebody, and they can find bits that they were already there, but they just couldn't see them. If we can work through the story. And the same thing happens, I think, when I'm writing. If I decide to change an ending, or I decide to add something, often the breadcrumbs are already there because your subconscious has put them in, and you're sort of working towards it, but you just don't know. So a lot of it is working with people and just bringing the best out of them, really, because they've got it all there. They've got all the ideas. They're their characters. It's their world. And just trying to show them how to develop it, I suppose. So I try not to bring too much of me in, hopefully.
Wonderful. I'm really sorry we appear to have run out of time, but I really, really enjoyed that conversation, and I think I'd love to thank you both for really showing your vulnerability, and I felt quite moved at times by how open you were both being, but thank you so much, and I know you're going to both hang around a bit later on, or now. Yeah. So please, big round of applause for Leanne and Sam.